the only show focused on stars' improvement strategies and the leaders who implement them. This is the Rising Stars with Rex Wallace Show, brought to you by Hyperlift.
Hey, welcome back to Rising Stars. I'm your host, Rex Wallace. Mick is our co-host. Mick, hey, how you doing?
Good, man. Happy to be here. Thank you.
So we had this episode's actually part 2 of a conversation we started, and had a great conversation. Felt like we just scratched the surface around innovation and star ratings. The full episode 1, if you haven't seen that yet, is on our YouTube channel, so please check that out. Lots of gold in there. And I want to welcome back our guests from the first part of this conversation that we're going to wrap up today. So we have Peet Van Biljon and Nate Lucena, who we did formal introductions in part 1. So we won't I don't think need to do more than that. But hey guys, welcome back.
Good to be back. Thanks.
So episode 1 of the or part 1 of this, right? We talked about a lot. This is again around an innovation paper that and research that Pete's been doing for government incentives, public sector, how it influences the private market. And he chose to focus on Medicare star ratings. So digging into Medicare star ratings and sort of the effect of CMS's quality bonus payments, the incentives, if you will, right, on performance. And I'll just do a quick recap here of part 1 before we jump in here, but because it's really compelling. Number one, there is correlation between a health plan's willingness and ability to innovate and that health plan's star ratings performance, based on the evidence that Pete's been able to gather from his research, at least, right? We can say that is true. We discussed that correlation as well as evolutionary economics, some examples of stars innovation, the duality of innovation, which means that it needs to include the creation of something new and that something new adding value to whatever you're applying it to. We discussed how to venture into the uncertainty of innovation, the value of quick and dirty experimentation, which builds that extremely important innovation muscle at your organization and within your teams, and how identifying your improvements as innovation and celebrating them as innovation achievements can actually play an important role in transforming your organization's culture. That feels like a book all by itself, right? Just kind of the part 1 of this conversation, and there's still so much more, I feel like. So Pete, maybe we start off. There was something in your research that said, plans to achieve 4+ stars had substantially higher innovation capabilities, but they also had substantially higher operational improvement capabilities. Can you unpack that? What distinguishes those two indexes from each other?
So, I tested for both. The interesting thing is I set out to test for about 30 capabilities that I all consider to be all important for innovation. And then in talking to people in the industry, I realized that a lot of things that innovation practitioners like me would see as an innovation capability may be seen as an operational improvement capability by people in the industry. So it may be that people in stars functions are doing parts of innovation without crediting themselves for it, right? So to give you an example, there was one capability: we understand our member retention drivers and we continually work to improve them. Now, I consider that to be an innovation capability, but what I learned is that a lot of people, in the industry will say, "Oh, that's just an operational capability that we need to have. That's kind of table stakes for us." So what I found is I could divide my 35 capabilities almost exactly in half, like 18, 17, between capabilities that are really inarguably innovation because it mentioned innovation or it mentioned doing new things or getting new technologies, and those that, like this one that I just mentioned, are people may think it's operational improvement. I would call it innovation in another context, but it was interesting to split them up for the purposes of the analysis, and I did bring them back together again. And so what I found is that both sets of capabilities have a positive correlation with star ratings, But if you put them together, um, after selecting the strongest capabilities, you get the by far the strongest correlation with star rating. So it suggests that it's not an either or. You need both these capabilities that may look more operational, and the ones that are clearly innovation, in order to have high star ratings.
Hey, as you're talking about that, Pete, it makes me think: is this like a kind of a false distinction, though, that there would ever be some sort of separation between innovation and operation? Like in my mind, innovation can apply to any aspect of the business, whether it's operational or strategic, or right. So
I
is that
agree.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is just because when I came into contact with our people, some
Hmm.
people are kind of you know slicing the sausage on the
Yeah.
distinction between.
I gotcha.
I thought, well, let's go have a look, and in the end, it all came back together again, because you got to be able to do things like, I'll give you another example of an operational capability. It was actually a very strong capability that tested very strong. Um, that we that the most appropriate and influential cross-functional partners are fully engaged, in the STARS program. Now, again, you may say this is kind of operational, it's kind of obvious. I put that in there because, as an innovation practitioner, I know that cross-functional engagement in any organization is a very important success element of innovation. So, I guess the good news is, no matter how you think about this, is that or how you want to tag things, is that if people start giving themselves credit for the operational capabilities which they clearly have, then it's almost like having course credit for some things that you didn't know you already had mastered. Then they're actually farther on the way to innovation than they think, and they can maybe focus on the next kind of capabilities, of which experimentation is such an important one, and which a lot of people seem to be struggling with.
So is it fair to say, like you've got that that maturity model of innovation, but going back to kind of what Nate said, is it is it fair to say that it's somewhat beauty is in the eye of the beholder? Like it depends on how you're viewing things. What might be an operational capability in one place could look like innovation in another place, because they're trying things that are new. It's innovative to this plan, where it might just be kind of standard table stakes the way we do things in another plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it is relative, because the what's new is obviously relative to the particular plan, and so other plans may have implemented, a particular thing already, but for this plan, it's new. So in innovation, we often, distinguish between, is something new to your company, is something new to your industry, is something new to the world, right? And I think a lot of people think they have to do something that's new to the world, be Elon Musk or whatever, right? Launch a Mars rocket. Uh, when there's a lot of incremental innovations to be made, in the sense that um, things that are new to company. And in fact, this ties into a broader conversation around productivity improvement. There's this issue in economics called the productivity paradox, where economists have been trying to figure out now for decades why we're not seeing the productivity improvements we were promised from all these wonderful new IT technologies and so on. And one of I think, the best explanations is that the best companies and the countries who are best at them have implemented them. It's just a lot of other people who haven't implemented them. So this gets us kind of to your point, whereas you don't need to be particularly original. It's maybe you're inspired by something that you heard on one of one of Rex's calls, or you saw at a conference. Um, you can adapt that idea to your own company and implement it. And yeah, I would say that's an innovation.
Yeah, I
Totally.
think of even like if you're focused back to that customer retention example, right? So if you all of a sudden, because I keep thinking of your what was it, the duality of innovation, right? Where
Yes.
it's just got to be something new, but that something new's got to bring value. So I think of if I'm focused on customer retention, maybe I start using predictive analytics for the first time this year, and and that is something new, and that allows me to build cohorts of members and focus on them more and probably decrease my retention significantly, right? So or increase my retention, decrease my disenrollment.
And
Yeah,
every time,
like
think of it as an exercise program. It's like if you're very unfit, maybe you should start by just walking around the block, and
Yeah.
then and
that's some innovation.
tomorrow,
What do you
tomorrow it's
saying?
like two blocks or whatever, and
Yeah.
so you keep adding to it. It's always good to make a start because it exercises your innovation muscles in this case.
Yeah.
One other thing. Oh, go ahead, Nate.
I was gonna say I kind of wanted to put a challenge out there to the health plans who may find themselves watching this video because I've absolutely been in companies before where it seems like they are willing to throw a lot of money at innovation and they will spend a lot of time sort of pressing on teams to be innovative and come up with innovations. And in my experience, it's been a relatively narrow definition of what that means. And so, Pete, like kind of what we're talking about today, it's almost like a challenge, right? To go back and say, well, if this is innovative for our organization in terms of applying X, Y, or Z to us getting to a goal we've never reached before, then that is innovation for us, even if it
Hmm.
seems like it's old hat, maybe even in our industry. So expanding what you're willing to call innovation, and I know in some ways that's semantics, but still we got to argue about it, right? Like in some ways, when you limit that, you limit how you fund that work, and maybe depending on where your org is, you shouldn't be doing that.
Well, I think
And
it's
the
a great point. You don't
yeah,
have to be
yeah.
like groundbreaking to
Yeah.
achieve this stuff. In fact, I think you somewhat limit yourself if you could, this can only be new. I'll give you one example. Here recently, there's a plan that we work with that hasn't been using texting for med adherence. Where there are other plans out there been using it for years and years and years. But for this plan, it's innovative and it's moving the needle and it's exciting.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you kind of have to open it up to what what does innovation mean to you, or what does it have to mean to fit this criteria? So I think it's a great point, Nate.
Yeah, I actually it reminds me some years back, and it's on my LinkedIn profile if people want to go look. I wrote a post called baseball analogy kind of post called "The Hidden Beauty of Hitting Singles." Right, you don't always have to hit a home run.
Yep.
People may set themselves up for failure if they try and do that. Just hit a single and get to the next base, and then see what you can do after that.
And nowhere is that more true than stars. I mean, stars is about
Right.
an incremental improvement, right? So I think that's a great analogy, Pete. And I also think, when we talk about this operational capability and this innovation capability, I can see, we talked in the first part of this conversation last time about building that innovation muscle, like the ability to pilot but I think in the conversation earlier makes me think of why these two are so tied together. Like I almost think operations, like if you're really good at like operational excellence, if you have a high, in a high score on this operational capability index, I think in my mind it means that you're good at executing, right? And I think it doesn't matter how innovative you are if you can't execute that strategy. So if you are really good as an organization or as a team at operationalizing something, then when you do have an innovative idea, you're much more effective at putting it in place and seeing impact from it. So I almost think you need to build both muscles, right? You need to build the innovation. You need to open up the concept of, hey, we need to pilot more often, but you also need to somehow build that operations muscle because I almost feel like that's the most important one.
I think it is really important because if you don't have that, you can't bring your innovation to fruition.
Right.
I mean, a lot of innovations fail because they failed in the implementation phase. It's and so one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they think about innovation is they think that it's they overthink the creative part and they kind of underestimate the implementation part of it. So yeah, I mean, rather implement a small new idea really well than to have a really big audacious idea that fails in the implementation stage because the
Right.
organization isn't ready for it.
And you
Or
need
it takes
folks
forever
that,
to execute.
Exactly,
yeah,
which in
exactly.
itself is a failure because time
Hmm.
is money in business, right? And
Right.
moments get lost.
And I think one of your findings was that it's, and I guess this is the definition of being of both indexes being highly, the combined index being highly correlated with high performing plans. It predicts it, right? So if you are good at these two things, it almost, I don't know if it guarantees, but massively increases your likelihood of scoring of being a high performer in star ratings, right? And quality improvement in general, which, and I think when we, you know, I want to dig into Darwinian stuff in a second, but when I
Right.
think of stars, matrix program, people, dotted lines, not direct influence, but more dotted line influence over key people who we're dependent upon for the success of this program, right? Like, um, yeah, if you're not doing these things from an operation standpoint, from an innovation standpoint, you're not going to be successful. So. And then you mentioned the highest capability index levels were associated with MA plans who were already at 5 stars. We touched on this a bit, but I just want to maybe hammer it home.
Yeah, and that was kind of a bonus result, which actually came and from a suggested analysis that you actually raised the point, and it 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 did test out that um, sure plans that have uh, 4 or 5, 4.5 stars or whatever, or even 5 stars have higher capabilities than lower plans. But the highest capabilities, if you break out the group of 5-star plans, are the plans that manage to stay there from at least the previous year. And so what this suggests is that you know innovation is also helping plans to cope with all these curveballs maybe thrown by the market, by CMS, and all these changes that they have to deal with. And that's why I made the remark that it is um, it isn't it's a form of adaptability. If you look at what you have to do to innovate, it's virtually indistinguishable from all the things you need to be an adaptable plan manager.
And
So let's,
I loved that quote that you had in there about those two being indistinguishable, and I think also it just makes sense, right? Like if you're already at that 5-star level and you're maintaining that 5-star level, it shows that you're not you're not sitting on the sidelines. You're not just sitting on your laurels waiting for things to continue. You're aggressively going after it. As the world changes, you figure out how you need to change, and if that's already embedded in your culture, I think it just makes sense that that it's going to show up on these kind of studies that you do, that you're excelling, in these kinds of capabilities.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think it's a really interesting insight, and it's actually consistent with the whole body of theory that's out there in economics about evolutionary behavior and so on and so on.
that's yeah. I'm After reading your stuff, I'm so interested in evolutionary economics now. It's something I took econ in college, but that's been a minute ago,
It's been a couple of years.
and it's been a couple of years, and it was written on a cave wall. I feel like,
Well,
but
they may not have taught evolutionary economics at that point
maybe
because
they
it's
didn't.
It was
I
too
don't
early in
know.
the evolution of things.
yeah, no, really, it's and some of the proponents of evolutionary economics, used to be more on the classical side, and it's just a it's just a very helpful way to understand how the firms and other economic agents work in a very dynamic environment as we have in these days.
So can you unpack the Darwinian a Darwinian environment, and you talk about this in your writing, and how it leads to adaptive behavior, which is kind of what we're talking about right now, right? But can you help the audience
Yeah.
understand what a Darwinian environment is, and why Medicare star ratings, and we can probably help with this part, but why Medicare star ratings fits into that definition?
So first of all, there's probably a lot of people in the audience who've taken a lot more biology than I have, and so I'm not an expert on the biological side, but I can talk a little bit about the very strong metaphor Darwinian environments and Darwinian behavior is for basically economic behavior in the modern understanding around evolutionary economics. Now, I should say quickly, economists have always tried to find inspiration from the harder sciences. So if you've done that economics 101 or 201 course, you would have heard a lot about equilibriums. And equilibrium was inspired in the classical in classical economics by thermodynamics, and which was like the steam age and the industrial revolution and all that power thermodynamics. So they were very impressed with it. And so then with Keynes and so on, with his famous work in 36 during the Depression, he kind of shot a hole in this idea that everything always has to be in equilibrium. Then Joseph Schumpeter came along, Austrian-American economist that's famous for the phrase, for talking about innovation in economic terms, and coining the phrase creative destruction comes from him. And so in that longer story that he had about creative destruction, he specifically pointed out that it's kind of a Darwinian struggle in the market and so if you want to talk about evolution in the business sense, yes, it requires adaptability. Yes, you are competing for resources. Yes, there is a survival of the fittest. If people don't buy your products, you go out of business. And yes, things change all the time, so evolution is never done. It has to be a continuous concept. And yes, there is just like in the animal world, there's this, you need to efficiently use the resources. You need to be good at exploiting the resources that you have. And so the idea behind evolutionary economics is that this Darwinian selection mechanism in the market actually looks a lot like the one in the animal world and in the plant world too, actually. Um, with biological evolution, um, these mutations come from random sources, copying problems or radiation or whatever, and then the environment selects the best of them. With business, we actually have the freedom to come up with ideas. So these aren't random mutations. Companies actually say, hey, what if we made this tweak to this product? What if we changed our Medicare Advantage plan in the following ways? What if we changed the way we, handle these management issues? So they actually get a chance to drive the first step of evolution, but they, in the end, the market is going to be what determines whether they're successful or not. And what has happened in this case is that CMS has, and I think largely intentionally, created a Darwinian environment where they're trying to make it hard to get to the top of star ratings and stay at the top. There's the cut points are lifted as the plans get better at them. The new metrics are introduced, so these curve balls and so on, and so they've effectively in a government procurement program created many of the elements that you would have in a totally free market situation.
I mean, I think the Darwinian description here just makes so much sense with stars, right? I mean, like Pete's saying, you've got cut points that are changing as overall performance change. You have, QI hold harmless changes. You have reward factor going away and HEI coming in. So it is all about who is out there adapting and understanding how they can make changes to, thrive and survive even in this new world. So I love this concept of survival of the fittest relative to the whole stars game. I just find it fascinating.
Me too. Yeah. It's yeah, it's it so fits, and at the same time I'm imagining some plans saying that it's not fair. It's still not fair, right? Like meaning that there are certain things, and I'm not saying this is true, but some plans will say if you have scale, you have a huge leg up, right? If you scale meaning if you have a lot of members in areas and you have which allows you to have deeper provider engagement. I imagine some plans saying, but if you're a single state plan, you've got a much bigger advantage over us because it's so much easier with one population. There are all these factors. Every plan is different. Every plan is unique, and I think that's why I love this too, because there, like, I feel like maybe there are keys to success, but it's a key ring with new keys on it, like every year, right? Like, it's the same keys that get you to success this year are not the keys that will get you to success. That'll open the door to the vault right next year,
Yep.
because of all the changes and because of your own situation and how your market changes and your competition changes. It's really fascinating, and yeah.
Yeah, so I love the comment about it not being fair. Look, I think every animal that ever went extinct, if it could express the thought, would have said, "Damn, this
Right.
isn't fair," right? But that doesn't help you, right? So I think I would challenge plans to say, okay, and this is another thing we do in innovation is to say, let's write down all our constraints on a whiteboard, and say these are constraints, and then you can actually have an exercise where you question some of the constraints, because constraints are also assumptions. So you could say, well, does that really need to be a constraint? What if? So then you get into these what if conversations. But once you've kind of agreed on what your constraints are, then you've created for yourself a box in which to innovate, and it actually makes innovation more productive. I always tell people innovation is not about thinking outside a box. Innovation is about finding the right box and using that to come up with your ideas in. That
Right.
is how you get productive innovation. So you can make these constraints work for you in the innovation process as well.
Yeah, that crystallized a little something for me actually, because health plans. If you're watching this, and we're all in four little boxes here, you're used to filling out your SWOT analysis, and a lot of that can sometimes involve identifying maybe some of these external headwinds, right? Um, and in some organizations, I've witnessed this and probably have even been a part of it, where it's oh, these are headwinds or constraints that we cannot control or impact, and they actually get put in their own box, as opposed to seeing it being seen as potentially like an opportunity to carve out time and sit and say, but what if? So instead of taking them as foregone conclusions in terms of, well, these are headwinds that we're not really going to have any impact on. What if you sat around and asked each other what if about that? It doesn't mean necessarily you're going to magically come up with a way to solve it or turn it in your favor. Um, but I would suspect that organizations that are performing really well over time and are resilient to these changes approach those headwinds in a way that's similar to that, at least
And and
sometimes.
and even if for 9 out of those 10 constraints, you eventually, after talking about it, decide that, hey, really there's nothing we can do about it,
Yeah.
1 out of 10 may actually be, oh, we could actually do something about it. And in fact, if we do, we'll have a leg up on the competition who've who assume that there's nothing to be done for 10 out of 10 constraints, right? So
Yeah.
it's again that finding that one thing. It's that could be a point of of competitive advantage for you.
can plans? I'm thinking the way CMS has created this, and you had a sentence that said, the dynamic environment created by the regulator demands adaptive behaviors to succeed. So, and I love that. I think you wrote that. I don't think I made that up after I read some of your. I think that's actually from. I think it's actually your words, but
Sounds like it.
it fits, right? It fits with
I've,
what. Yeah,
yeah.
and my question is, if I'm a health plan, I'm trying to adapt to succeed in this program that the regulator has, that is overseeing me in. But the way the way I'm managing this program is through a lot of people in my organization, vendors. I'm trying to engage with my physician partners, with my members, even with prospective members. So there's it's a very big ecosystem within star ratings. Can I somehow replicate this Darwinian model that they have me playing on? Can I somehow create that same model for my employees, or to to incent innovation and operational excellence in a way that I'm not doing now? I don't know if that makes complete sense, but that's in my head.
Yeah, and it is possible, and I would, for internal purposes, I would have more carrot and less stick, right? I would, but the idea of, you know, having internal like innovation competitions, or you know, making basically encouraging innovation and making it interesting for people to do and making them feel rewarded. It doesn't even need to be, a big financial reward. Sometimes it could be, but typically companies that do this well make the financial reward the budget to go pursue your idea once it's won the competition, right? And so that way the company plays venture capitalist in a way. So there's all sorts of ways in which a company can, and I'm always very excited about this, because I believe every one of us was born with the ability to innovate, and we get it squeezed out of us by the educational system, by the needs of corporate performance needs and so on, that doesn't like new things, right? And that's understandable too. If you want to run a good operation, you know you can't always have things change, but innovation requires you to actually change something. So you could, for example, and a lot of companies do this in a lot of industries. You could have basically an innovation competition or tournament of some kind. Some people call it, where you basically, and again, I wouldn't throw it wide open. I would make it specific, right? We're looking for ideas that can help us to do X, Y, and Z. I think the executive leadership needs to get together and say, well, what ideas are we really willing to pay for in terms of people's time and other resources, and then put those as specific as possible challenges out there. Get people to ideate, select ideas for implementation, fund them, and encourage the people who do it. And this comes right back to the capabilities, because one of the strong capabilities was also that the leaders are engaged in innovation and encourage innovation. So the moment such a competition is launched, and in the end people see it's almost like an Oscar ceremony where the awards are handed out or whatever, they see senior leaders uh, um, you know, promoting and awarding innovation. It sets the culture as well. So aside from those few projects that you may specifically elevate and fund and praise and so on, it also changes the general culture.
Mm-hmm. Like Nate, what if one of your clients, started, so the way plans are financially incented to be high performing or to achieve significant improvement, even, right? Um, and there's this public recognition from being high in star ratings. What if one of your clients started, for the departments or measure owners that, or for the department that, if a department owns, like the clinical department versus provider engagement versus customer service, et cetera, whichever department achieved the highest significant improvement in their measures, they get an extra resource next year, right? Like some serious financial incentive for that department, just like pretend like they're a health plan in your CMS, right? Like, I mean, clearly there's a budget impact there that you've got to manage, and maybe that means some other department loses a resource, right? I don't know, but I react to that. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think at the highest level, I've been a part of organizations that absolutely incentivize their departments on really specific aspects of star ratings that they have an influence over. I think the missing part that you're bringing up is often any provision of uh, ongoing support or funding to execute on any innovation that comes to pass, right? So I do think, and we talk about this a lot with our clients, right? It's one thing to say, hey, maybe you have a discretionary bonus program and part of it is tied to stars performance that you're assigned to lead. I do think that is a good practice to have. And Pete, I'd be interested in your perspective on this. What can become hard and disheartening within the organization for people around an expectation to innovate or even do process improvement is you're incentivizing my star performance, but there's actually no mechanism for me to change anything of note, whether that's incremental funding, whether it's the ability to bring in a new vendor that is really innovative, that could really move the needle in a timely way. The rest of the sort of cogs in that wheel in the organization are not set up to let people do that. And so that I think is a disconnect that often happens. But I think in an ideal situation, that is what we would have. So I don't know how organizations can collectively decide that they're going to build out an environment that facilitates that kind of thinking.
Yeah, and it's often a tension, right? Because there's a tension between the daily needs of the business and what I call the performance engine versus where you want to do new things. And sometimes organizations go to the one extreme where they say, well, we got to put all this new stuff, this innovation stuff in a separate unit, and then you get like the skunk works, that kind of thing. But the problem with that is that once something's been invented there, how do you bring it back to the mothership and insert it into the performance engine? That's then you created another problem. I think in terms of the kind of incremental innovations that we've advocated earlier in this discussion, there's no need for you to have like a separate organization or skunkworks or whatever, but there's clearly a need, based on what you say, to maybe create some mandates to change certain things, right? So if you're going to call for innovation, maybe part of that call for innovation is to say, and we are willing to entertain different vendors, different providers, different. We're willing to look at, changing our process here or whatever. You gotta open up the space for innovation. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, if you keep people in this tiny little box, then like it's very hard to innovate your way out of that. The other thing I would say is I would be somewhat careful of making this sort of a Darwinian struggle between different departments, because that can get very negative very quickly if some are perceiving the winners to win at their cost. In fact, some of the best innovation competitions, and I know I've seen some, and I think even McKinsey and Company, where I was for some time, has this internal competition. They call it an Olympiad. But one of the specs for that is that your innovation team has to be comprised of people from different departments, different seniorities, and so on. So it's to kind of get away from this siloed thinking. It's to get away from just the usual suspects. And so I would actually advocate that, if if siloed thinking is a big problem, I would advocate that building a requirement into your innovation competition that says we want people from at least 3 different departments on this team.
On a team. I love that. That's
Yeah, I do too.
Totally agree.
I mean, the only thing that I would throw out, and I don't know if there's time, but just anything that we can do for plans that want to be more innovative, want to, start moving on this, are there next steps that are not significant actions, but things that they can take right now to move that direction?
Yeah, it's a very good. It's obviously a very big question. It's very broad, and it might be different for depending upon the organization and where they are on their journey. Because so I think maybe the first, just like with this personal fitness plan analogy I used earlier, maybe the first thing is for them to assess where they are on the innovation scale.
Right.
It's like if you had to grade yourself for innovation between 1 and 10, where 1 is you have no idea how to innovate, 10 is you're like world class. Where would you put yourself? And then talk about, look, what is kind of tripping us up? And people may say, and then people may start talking about these constraints that Nathan mentioned. Is like, yeah, well, we want to innovate, but we can't get the funds, or we're always told that everything has to stay the same or whatever. And then you start picking away at some of those constraints to start creating the space for you to take. First, maybe it may be baby steps. Well, some organizations may be a bit farther along, but they may be stuck in the middle at a 5 or 6 out of 10, and then they got to ask themselves, well, what do they lack? And you can do and an innovation assessment, which is quite similar actually to the research survey in this case, where you could look at what do we rate ourselves good at, and where do we rate ourselves not good. Maybe it pops out that we kind of have great insights, we're very strong operationally, but we don't have a culture of experimentation. So hey, can we do a little project where we push ourselves to do a little experiment, and and again take that little step to start mastering that missing capability.
Okay. I think we've reached the end. That's um again a lot in here too, and I feel like these 2 episodes have been just sort of a how-to manual, right? On not just innovation, but on how to be better operators, better at operations, right? And build culture, um, and sort of every just sort of unpacking what it means to be good in the star rating. So yeah, Pete, really looking forward to your finished product at some point. I know you're working on.
Yeah, it's like a whole book, and maybe there's also some papers as well that will that we could look into. And in
Yeah.
the meantime, if I can shamelessly plug my book on
Yeah, please.
innovation, if people are interested in it, um, there's a lot about the organizational challenges. There's a lot about things like experimentation and how to get started and stuff in here. And I myself use it as a reference book, as you can see. I kind of wrote it for myself, as well as for other people. So, at least that's another starting point for people.
And I'll throw my support in there. We've gotten to read bits and pieces of this, and I'll tell you, it's inspirational. You can look at this, and it really does drive you to want to push this direction. I thought it was very well done.
Thank you very much, and more to come.
Yeah, I mean, stars is complicated, and this opens the brain in just sort of new spaces, right? That maybe we're not used to spending much time thinking about, but really insightful, really impactful when we learn how to do this and build these muscles. So yeah, Pete, thanks so much. Again, looking forward to seeing the book, the papers, and everything that will follow once you get all of this done. But thanks for giving us an early insight. We really appreciate it. We've enjoyed this. Nate, thanks for all your insights. Great conversation. So yeah, we will talk later. Thanks, guys.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you.
Everybody.